Hey guys, I know a lot of you have been asking for this tutorial in particular, so I'm excited to finally release it for you. Um, what we're going to be doing today is blending two different exposures that were taken at night and create one really high quality Milky Way image. So the key to this really is you need to have a star tracker, otherwise this isn't really going to work out properly. Just to show you what we're going to do here, what you want to do is take a 3 or 4 minute long exposure for the foreground, which is going to capture a ton of detail. And if I really zoom in here, you'll notice there's hardly any noise because I was capturing so much more light compared to a 20 or 30-second exposure. um, I get a lot more color detail, a lot less grain, and overall the images are going to be a lot higher quality. The problem though, of course, is the stars are going to move over the course of that 3 or 4 minutes, even at like 14 millimeters, obviously. Um, so the trick to do that, to get around that rather, is to use a star tracker. And here's my tracked exposure here. You'll notice I've captured a ton of detail in the Milky Way. The stars are still sharp. However, the foreground has blurred substantially. What's going on is that when I put my camera on the star tracker, it's going to move the camera at the same speed as Earth's rotation and therefore cancel out the star movement. So today I want to show you how to blend the stars and the foreground together. This is going to be pretty complicated though, so I'm going to try and simplify it as much as possible. Um, with that being said, I highly recommend you guys at least look into getting Raya Pro. This is a paid program by Jimmy McIntyre, but it's going to make your life a lot easier, even if you're doing landscapes or any type of photography really where you need to blend multiple exposures. And Jimmy's a really talented artist from, I believe, England, but he does amazing landscape photos in particular. And he's got a ton of really high quality, easy to follow YouTube tutorials for blending and editing. So check him out. But the main thing we're going to be using today is InstaMask, which actually comes with Raya Pro. So just to show you on his website here, Shutter Evolve, we're looking again at Raya Pro, which is going to make this process a lot easier. Um, and again, I'm going to be using InstaMask mainly. With that being said, I know a lot of people don't want to have to go out and buy extra things to edit, so I am going to be covering some alternatives in Photoshop. We're just going to do it the old-fashioned way. It's going to take a little bit longer and be more complicated, but we should hopefully still get a high-quality blend between the two exposures. And if you're still new to star trackers, I recommend going over to my website. I'll have a link to this in the description, but again, a star tracker is just going to make a huge difference. You can see I've captured the Andromeda galaxy here just using a 70 to 200 millimeter lens and a star tracker. Same with the Orion Nebula here, and the Rho. I don't even know how to say that, but that was just with a macro lens there. So we're able to capture a ton of detail now when we use a star tracker, with virtually no noise as well. Now this tutorial kind of covers what to look for if you haven't bought a star tracker yet. So I'm going to cover some pertinent things, the weight limit of your gear, how that's going to affect things, or what type of battery the different star trackers use. And I have also got this full overview of the Ioptron Sky Tracker Pro, which is what I use. And having used it for the past couple months, I really like it. My biggest complaint is that it can't handle um, like the 70 to 200 very well because it is a big lens. But anyway, let's get back into Photoshop. And what I want to do, hopefully you have some two different exposures that you can follow along with, and we'll get to it then. Before I get into the full tutorial, I want to make sure we're all clear on layer masks, just because this is very crucial to understand. To add a layer mask to any one of your layers, you just come down here and click on the icon with the little hole in the center, and by default a white mask will be applied to your current layer. Now it's critical to understand that white means visible, black means invisible. So for instance, this is my tracked exposure. If I click on my layer mask and I hit Control or Command I, that will invert the mask, it'll make it all black, and now it disappears. If I take a white paintbrush though, I can start painting in the layer. And all I'm doing is adding white to this otherwise black mask. If you want to see more details on your mask itself, if you hold down the Alt key and click on the actual layer mask, you'll see exactly what's going on. Again, white means the photo is becoming visible, black means it's invisible. And when you have two different exposures, things can be kind of complicated. But you'll see right there what I did was I accidentally added black to the actual photo. So that might happen to you. You want to make sure when you're doing this, you're always on the actual layer mask, and you'll see it highlights there. So be aware of that, because that can screw you up. But I'm going to right click and delete the layer mask. And with that said, let's get into using InstaMask to blend both of our exposures together. Alright, so the first thing you want to do when you have both your tracked image and your foreground image loaded up into Photoshop together is you want to have your foreground exposure on the bottom as your background layer, and you want to duplicate this. So I'm going to right click it, hit duplicate, and then drag it on top. Now in my case, I didn't align the two photos. I moved the camera up to capture more of the Milky Way. In hindsight, I would say don't move the camera at all. Just take two exposures. But anyway, it's just going to complicate things more for me. So let's see what we can do about it. The first thing I do need to do is lower the opacity, and you'll see there's a huge difference between the two. So if I click and drag my background layer down, I want to get this more or less lined up with my original photo. And I think that's about as good as I can get right there. So now I'm going to put my opacity back to 100. I'm going to come over here to my crop tool, and if I extend the canvas down, I can get the full image now. So you'll notice this is all the extra stuff I got by moving the camera up, and this is my foreground. Now, first thing I want to do is show you how easy InstaMask is, because we're going to take what could take somebody hours and hours to do when we have a complicated horizon like this and do it in about 3 minutes or less. It's really remarkable just how well this works. So I'm going to open up InstaMask, and if you're unfamiliar with this program right now, it obviously looks very confusing, but there's a couple buttons I want us to get really familiar with right off the bat. That's R, G, B, and then we have brights, that's what the B stands for, 1 through 6, darks 1 through 6, and midtones 1 through 6. Basically, if you don't understand luminosity masks yet, frankly, I'm still trying to learn how these all work, but this process has helped a lot with that. Just start clicking on different buttons. So in this case, I'm going to click on red, and it's going to automatically go through, and using colors, it's going to create a mask. So remember, with masks, white means on, visible, black means turned off, invisible. And what we want to do is find a high contrast between the sky and the trees. I want either the sky to be bright white and the trees to be pitch black, or vice versa. So what I'm really just going to do is click on these different buttons: red, green, blue, brights, darks, and I want to see what gives me the most contrast right out of the gate. And if I go to blue next, you'll see the foreground will probably turn mostly black, which is what I want in this case. See how everything disappeared now because it's based on color, and that was red fire there. So I've got a pretty good contrast between the two. It's still not great, so let's start using our different masks down here. Let's just try brights 3, for example. See how everything's black now? That's going to be terrible. There's no contrast there. We don't want that. We're looking for white on black. So let me try, let's say, darks 1. That looks better. We can see all the trees there, but again, the sky's too bright. There's not a lot of contrast. So let's try brights, or rather darks 4. Now this looks a lot better. If I zoom in, we've got white trees with a black sky. That's what I want. Now to fine tune this even more, I can come down here with the shadow slider, and I can increase this to get even more contrast. Or the midtones, I can mess with this to get even more contrast. Same with highlights. And again, what I'm trying to do is get it so I've got a lot of detail in the trees, they're all white, and the sky is just completely black. And you'll see this works very nice in this particular instance. Now this is all going to depend on your image, so you're going to have to go through and tune this yourself, but I think you want to be careful. You'll see there's some fine detail in the trees that was getting lost because I drug the slider up too high. So now I'm gonna just try and adjust these sliders until I have as much detail as I can there. But now you'll see some of the skies coming back up here, and there's no perfect way to do this, but right now I think that looks good. We've got the white foreground on the black sky. Next, we want to hit select, and that's going to select whatever's white. Remember, whatever's white is going to select. So if I hit that, you see I have marching ants now over the foreground. And since my sharp foreground is my top layer, I can hit, why don't I hit black mask? And this is going to look really weird at first, but bear with me. What it's going to do is make everything go black. So let me hide these other two layers. Now I want to take a white paintbrush, and remember I've selected that foreground using the blending mode or the luminosity mask, and I'm just going to paint in the foreground. And you'll see as I'm painting in, the trees and the foreground are coming back, but even if I paint in here, nothing's coming back in because that wasn't selected. I don't want to do that, but just to be clear, this is why it works so well. And if I zoom in, all that detail is coming in from the trees, but it's not selecting the sky. And that's the hardest part of this whole process, is finding a mask that works. And this is why I love InstaMask. I'm so happy that I learned about this tool and I'm being able to use it now, because it makes this process literally a 3-minute thing, if that, right out of the gate. Now you'll notice I painted over it and it's still not entirely selected, so you might have to do multiple passes, but we're mainly concerned with the horizon right now. We want to get that all painted in nicely. And remember, keep clicking on it multiple times to get all the detail out of it. And then once I've done this and I've selected my foreground nicely, I'm going to enable my stars layer, which I had hidden previously. Now if I zoom in here, you'll notice I have these blurred trees. That's because I didn't align everything properly earlier. What I can do very quickly and easily to fix this issue is come down here, I'm going to click on my stars layer, and I'm just going to drag it down so it disappears. Those trees that are blurry disappear. And now I have sharp stars on sharp foreground, even though both exposures were 4 minutes long and different settings and all that. And let me move it over here. I'm going to hit Control H to hide the marching ants. And things look pretty bad right now. That's because, again, if I hold down the Alt key, click on background copy, you'll notice black means invisible. So let me quickly go through and paint this back in and hit Control H again. You'll notice I still have my mask selected, so I want to undo that. I want to hit Control D, so now I'm just working freehand, and I can fix this horizon issue real quick. Again, to get this effect, you want to click and hold down on the Alt key and click on your layer mask. And with that being said, here we go. I can come back later and fine-tune Mount Hood, but my main concern was the trees. And you can see again a very nice difference there. And in this case, I'm going to bring back my crop, get rid of that extra stuff on top, hit OK. And there we go. Would that take 3 or 4 minutes? And I've got, I cut off the tree on my foreground exposure. It looks like I might have to move my stars down a bit more to hide this blurry tree. Something like that. But all in all, that made things so much easier. And for me, that's worth the money right there. If you're going to be doing a lot of this in 2018 and going on, where you have complicated foregrounds and skies. Again, all we did was use InstaMask, and we clicked on these different buttons to find a heavy contrast between foreground and the sky. Then we clicked select, and then all we had to do was paint it in. That's all there was to it. If I don't want any of this, I can just hit X and it'll disappear. But that's using InstaMask, which again I highly recommend. But I know again a lot of people don't want to spend the money, so next I want to show you some different ways to do this manually. Okay, so I want to show you how to do this whole process for free now. And believe it or not, we're actually going to need to go back over to Jimmy McIntyre's website. He's been very gracious to offer his Easy panel, which I have right here for free. And This is going to make the whole process a lot easier. Not nearly as easy as InstaMask, but the alternative is to spend way too much time and effort doing all this manually. And what we're really doing is just creating luminosity masks. So go over, get the free easy panel, and then come back. But this is more complicated than InstaMask, and it's very crucial that you follow along exactly as I do this, or else things are going to get confusing and they're probably not going to work properly. So, with that being said, I want to make sure you have your foreground layer on top with your stars layer directly underneath. And for right now, I only want your foreground layer visible. Once you've got that set up, I want you to create a new layer mask, and then I want you to invert it with Control or Command I. Right now, so now everything's invisible. Then you want to right click on the layer mask itself and hit Disable Layer Mask. And I know this is like, why are we doing all this? Just follow along with me for now and trust me. Next, I want to click on the layer itself and then hit Create Luminosity Masks. This is just going to do everything in the background. We don't have to worry about anything. Once it finishes, you'll notice the marching ants everywhere, which I don't know why it does that, but just hit Control or Command D to deselect this whole selection there. Now you might be wondering, what did we actually just do right now? Like, where is our luminosity masks? Those will be in the channels tab up here. So if I click on channels, you'll notice I've got a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel, which we saw these in InstaMask. By default though, we're on RGB up here. We also have brights 1 through 6, darks 1 through 6, and midtones 1 through 6, same as an InstaMask, but now it's laid out differently and more manual. So what I want to do is go through these again, just like an InstaMask. Click on the red, click on the green, click on the blue, try darks, whatever you can do to find the most contrast between the foreground and the sky. We want a black sky and a white foreground. In my case, I think darks 3 is going to work the best. So I'm going to click on that. Next, you want to hit Control or Command L. That'll bring up the level slider. And just like in InstaMask, we want to adjust this so we have more contrast between the foreground and the sky. And this is going to be kind of up to your specific image, but just play around with these sliders until you get it looking good. And remember, we're mainly concerned with the very delicate foreground here. We're not as concerned with what's going on down here. We can easily come back and fix that. We're just worried about the horizon. And I'm going to hit Control or Command L again and fine tune this. And then once that looks good, you can see it screwed up the sky a little bit, so I'm going to undo that. That should be good enough for now for the purpose of this demonstration, but again, just try and get it so there's good separation there. Once you've adjusted your preferred mask, you want to hit Control or Command, and you'll notice the icon changes there to a little box. That's going to select it, so hold down Control and click on it. Now you'll see everything got highlighted. Next, we want to go back to Layers and then click on our layer mask, which is black. Now you're wondering what happened. Everything disappeared. That's good. That's what we want. Now we want to click on our paintbrush with a white paintbrush, and we're just going to paint in the foreground just like we did before. And you'll notice the sky is not getting painted in, only the foreground, which is exactly what we want. And I'm just going to go over this very quickly. And the more contrast you have, the darker your foreground, the easier this is going to be. If your foreground's more gray, you're going to have to go over this multiple passes. So be aware of that. The more contrast, the easier this is. The less contrast, you have to keep brushing over like I'm doing down here. So be aware of that. But once you've got your foreground largely selected, and again you want to zoom in, make sure you've got the trees nice and detailed there. Once that's done, I'm going to hit Control or Command D. I'm going to quickly fill in all the other areas that were not visible. And once I've done that, I can just enable my stars layer. And there we go. Sharp trees, sharp stars, and it looks great. And that's the free way to do it. Again, I can crop this down, and There we go. Now I'm gonna have to come back, and frankly, what I probably will do is, again, right click to disable the layer mask. Mount hood's gonna be very easy to do with a quick selection brush. So I can come up here to the quick selection tool, select it very quickly. You'll see it does a nice job. And this is another way to do this whole process, is using the quick select tool, but it doesn't work well with trees, which is why I went through all this trouble of showing you this other way to do it. It works great on simple things like that. So once that's selected, I can re-enable the layer mask, get my white paintbrush and just paint in that. And then I'll hit Control or Command E to deselect. And there we go. That looks really good. Actually, I did this original image a couple weeks ago, and the blending was terrible. I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but this came out 100% better than that one did. So if you have any questions, I'm sure you do, leave a comment. I'll try and help you out as much as I can. I know this was kind of complicated, especially if you're not familiar with luminosity masks, but go through, watch the video again, and just uh, try and follow along with your own images. But I think this will really help your Milky Way photos out in 2018, where you're going to have that really nice detailed foreground with hardly any noise by taking that 3-minute exposure. And hopefully you have the star tracker. You can take your 3 or 4 minute photo for the stars and then blend the two together very easily, as I showed you today, and have a really nice image. So thanks for watching, guys.